While you were scrolling through social media, arguing about politics, and watching the latest Netflix series, China was writing checks. Big ones. They weren't buying stocks or real estate in Manhattan. They were buying something far more valuable: ports, railways, highways, power plants, mines. China has quietly purchased half of Africa's infrastructure, and nobody in the West said a word. This isn't conspiracy. This is public record. Over $2 trillion in loans and investments since 2000. 52 out of 54 African nations now owe money to Beijing. Debt trap diplomacy. The Western powers who colonized Africa with guns. China figured out you can do it with contracts. And the beautiful part, they made Africa thank them for it. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand how the greatest wealth transfer of the 21st century happened right under your nose, and why the bill is about to come due. The blueprint. In 2000, China held its first forum on China-Africa cooperation. Western media barely covered it. They were too busy laughing at China's GDP, which was smaller than Italy's at the time. Big mistake. That forum wasn't a diplomatic photo op. It was the unveiling of a 50-year strategy. Hide your strength, bide your time. And bide their time they did. While America was spending $4 trillion turning the Middle East into rubble, China was building roads. While Europe was arguing about refugee quotas, China was signing port deals. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Africa has what China needs: oil, copper, cobalt, rare earth minerals, agricultural land. China has what Africa wants: money, infrastructure, and no lectures about human rights. No conditions, no democracy requirements, just business. Western aid comes with strings attached. Chinese loans come with Chinese construction companies. By 2023, China had become Africa's largest trading partner, largest bilateral creditor, and largest infrastructure financier, all while the West wasn't looking. But here's where it gets interesting. Follow the money. Let's talk numbers, because numbers don't lie. Between 2000 and 2022, Chinese state banks and enterprises loaned over $170 billion to African governments. That's more than the World Bank, more than the IMF, more than the entire G7 combined. But here's what makes Chinese loans different. They're not structured like Western aid. They're structured like business deals, collateralized business deals. Kenya borrowed $7 billion for a railway from Mombasa to Nairobi. The collateral, the port of Mombasa itself. Zambia borrowed $6 billion for infrastructure. When they couldn't pay, China took control of their national power company. Uganda borrowed for an international airport. The loan agreement, confidential, but leaked documents suggest the airport itself is the collateral. Assets as collateral. If you're starting to see the pattern here, hit like and subscribe to keep exposing what they hide, because what comes next shows you exactly where this money went. The West gave Africa fish. China bought the entire ocean. The port strategy. If you want to understand China's Africa strategy, forget about the loans for a moment. Look at the ports. Djibouti. China built a naval base there in 2017, their first overseas military installation. But they also built the port that handles 90% of Djibouti's trade, and a railway connecting it to Ethiopia, and a water pipeline. Now they're building ports in Tanzania, Kenya, Angola, Nigeria, and Cameroon. They call it infrastructure development. Military strategists call it something else. The string of pearls. A chain of Chinese-controlled or Chinese-influenced ports stretching from the South China Sea across the Indian Ocean to Africa's eastern coast. Whoever controls the ports controls the trade. The British understood this in the 19th century. The Americans understood it in the 20th. Now China understands it in the 21st. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Many of these ports were built by Chinese companies, financed by Chinese banks, and if the loans default, owned by Chinese entities. Sri Lanka already found out what happens. They couldn't pay their debt. Now China has a 99-year lease on Hambantota port. The same playbook is being run across Africa. And the infrastructure goes far deeper than ports. Rails of control. Ports need railways. Railways need power plants. Power plants need mines. Mines need workers. China is building all of it. The Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway, built by Chinese companies, operated by Chinese companies, financed by Chinese banks. The Mombasa-Nairobi Standard Gauge Railway, Same story. The Libido corridor connecting the Democratic Republic of Congo's Copper Belt to Angola's coast. Chinese fingerprints everywhere. Build, operate, own. These aren't just transportation projects. They're extraction networks, designed to move Africa's resources from the interior to the coast as efficiently as possible, and from the coast, straight to China. The colonial powers built railways too. The British built lines in Kenya to extract tea and coffee. The Belgians built lines in Congo to extract rubber and minerals. The difference? At least the colonial powers were honest about what they were doing. China calls it win-win cooperation. But when you look at where the railways go, they connect mines to ports. Not cities to cities. Not people to opportunities. Resources to ships. The pattern becomes undeniable when you see what they are really after. Resource hunger. China consumes half the world's copper, half the world's aluminum, over 60% of the world's rare earth minerals, and their domestic supplies are running out. Africa has what China needs. The Democratic Republic of Congo alone holds 70% of the world's cobalt. That's the metal that makes your phone battery work, your electric car, your laptop. Without cobalt, there is no green energy transition. And who controls most of Congo's cobalt mines? Chinese companies. 15 of the 19 largest cobalt mining operations in Congo have significant Chinese ownership. They didn't conquer these resources with armies. They bought them with loans. When you owe the bank $1 million, the bank owns you. When you owe the bank $1 billion, you own the bank. But here's the twist China figured out. When you owe China $1 billion and you can't pay, China owns your mines, your ports, your railways. It's debt-trap diplomacy at scale. And the West just watched it happen while arguing about climate accords. Speaking of which, there's a dark irony here that nobody wants to discuss. The green irony. Here's the irony that should keep Western environmentalists up at night. Every electric vehicle sold in Europe or America, the cobalt in its battery likely came from a Chinese-controlled mine in Congo, mined by workers earning $2 a day, including children as young as 7. The green energy transition that's supposed to save the planet is running on African child labor and Chinese financing. While Western governments subsidize electric vehicles and pat themselves on the back, China is controlling the supply chain. They process 90% of the world's rare earth minerals. They manufacture 70% of the world's solar panels. They control the lithium and cobalt that powers every green technology. Green for whom? So when a Tesla rolls down the streets of San Francisco, understand the supply chain. Cobalt from Congo, processed in China, shipped on Chinese vessels, from Chinese-built ports, along Chinese-financed railways. The Western environmental movement has made China the gatekeeper of the green future, and that gatekeeper is collecting tolls across Africa. But resources aren't the only thing China is extracting. Soft power play. China isn't just buying Africa's resources, they're shaping its future leaders. Confucius Institutes now operate in over 50 African countries, teaching Chinese language, Chinese history, Chinese perspective. Every year, over 50,000 African students receive scholarships to study in China. They return home speaking Mandarin, with Chinese contacts and a favorable view of Beijing. Meanwhile, African media is increasingly influenced by Chinese outlets. Star Times, a Chinese company, now provides television service to over 30 million African households. Guess which news channels are prominently featured? The Western media talks about Russian disinformation. But China's information operation in Africa is vastly larger, better funded, and more sophisticated. The pen is mightier than the sword, but the loan is mightier than both. When a country owes you billions, their newspapers tend to be friendly. Their politicians tend to vote your way at the UN. Their students tend to study your language. This isn't conspiracy. This is strategy, executed over decades while the West was distracted by the Middle East. And the political implications are staggering. The UN GAMBIT. Africa has 54 countries. The United Nations General Assembly operates on one country, one vote. Do the math. China has been doing that math for 20 years. When the UN votes on Taiwan, African nations vote with China. When the UN votes on human rights in Xinjiang, African nations vote with China. Votes for dollars. When the International Criminal Court tried to investigate Chinese officials, Which countries blocked it? The same ones with the biggest Chinese loans. This is how you purchase international legitimacy. The West built international institutions after World War II and assumed they'd control them forever. China figured out you don't need to destroy these institutions. You just need to buy enough votes to control them. And with 54 African nations in your pocket, you have a quarter of the UN right there. Add in loans to Pakistan, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, and various Pacific Island nations. China is building a voting bloc without firing a shot. Democracy for sale. But there's one question nobody in the West wants to ask. Why didn't we stop this? The answer is uncomfortable. Western failure. The West didn't lose Africa to China. The West abandoned it. After the Cold War ended, Western interest in Africa collapsed. Aid budgets were cut. Diplomatic posts closed. Investment dried up. Africa became an afterthought. Africa is the world's largest emerging market, but Western businesses barely noticed. While China was signing billion-dollar deals, Western companies complained about corruption and risk. While China was building highways, Western NGOs were building orphanages. While China was training the next generation of African leaders in Beijing, Western universities were pricing African students out of their institutions. The Belt and Road Initiative was announced in 2013. For 5 years, Western analysts dismissed it as propaganda. By the time they realized it was real, China had already locked up strategic assets across 3 continents. Too little, too late. Now America is scrambling with initiatives like Prosper Africa and the Build Back Better world. Too late. China has a 20-year head start, and the deals are already signed. The question now isn't how to stop China. It's what happens when the debts come due. The debt bomb. Here's what keeps economists up at night. Many African nations can't pay. Zambia has already defaulted. Ghana restructured. Kenya, Ethiopia, and Uganda are teetering. When countries can't pay their debts to Western institutions, there's a process. IMF intervention, debt restructuring. Painful but predictable. When countries can't pay China, nobody knows what happens. Nobody. Chinese loan agreements are notoriously opaque. Secret clauses. Confidential terms. Many require disputes to be settled in Chinese courts, under Chinese law. Sri Lanka couldn't pay. They lost their port. Pakistan is struggling. They're losing sovereignty over strategic infrastructure. Across Africa, the dominoes are starting to wobble. And here's the terrifying part. This might be exactly what China wanted. Not the interest payments, the defaults, because each default transfers another real asset into Chinese hands. The debt was never meant to be repaid. It was meant to be collected. Ports, mines, railways, agricultural land. The new colonialism doesn't need armies. It just needs accountants. So here's where we are. While the West was distracted by culture wars, endless Middle Eastern conflicts, and internal political drama, China executed the largest strategic acquisition in modern history. They didn't fire a single shot. They didn't send a single soldier. They just wrote checks. And now they own the ports, the railways, the mines, the power plants, the future. Control without conquest. This is the lesson of the 21st century. You don't need to colonize a country to control it. You just need to own its infrastructure. You just need to hold its debt. You just need to shape its leaders. The British Empire took centuries to build and collapsed in decades. China's African empire was built in 20 years, and it's not going anywhere. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. The West wrote the playbook for extracting wealth from Africa. China just updated it for the modern era. If you made it this far, comment debt diplomacy to prove you understand what's really happening. The question is what you'll do with this knowledge. Will you keep sleeping while the map gets rewritten? Or will you start paying attention to the deals being made in your name? Every government lies. The question is, what are they lying about? The truth is out there. You just have to follow the money. Like and subscribe to keep exposing what they don't want you to see. Until next time, question everything.